Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you are in the world, welcome to this virtual forum organized by the Tourism Linkages Network, which is a division of the Tourism Enhancement Fund. And this morning, we'll be discussing tourism and ESG. What is ESG? Environmental, social, and corporate governance. Now, I'm not your expert on this, so I have three panelists with me this morning who will be guiding you through ESG specifically as it relates to tourism. So I'd like you to welcome for me, we have Mr. John Biles, John G. Biles. He's the managing partner of Chukka Caribbean and Adventure Tours. Then we have with us Dr. Chanel Fingal Robinson, Social Development and Sustainability Specialist, and Miss Jessica Simpson. Now, you know, you have CEOs, you have CFOs, but she is the CXO, Chief Experience Officer from Sandals Resort International. I'm your moderator today, Taisha Turner, but I'm not alone. You'll notice we have here a Jamaican Sign Language interpreter. Please welcome Mrs. Stephanie McIntyre Groves from PA, Bridging the Gap. Welcome to Mrs. McIntyre Groves. Is going to be helping those of us who would need the sign language interpretation. Now, I would like to, and please forgive me, it's Jessica Shannon. Jessica Shannon is our CXO, or Chief Experience Officer at Sandals Resort International. Now, what is ESG, you might ask? And I gave a little hint as to what it might be. But it's a business framework for considering environmental issues, social issues in the context of corporate governance. And again, this is organized by the Tourism Linkages Network. So we're focused on how ESG relates to tourism. And I also want to share with you that following the program, when we end, you'll be able to access the entire virtual forum, not just in English, but in Spanish. So we are quite accessible. And I'm going to throw out a challenge to you all. We're streaming on TEF's social media pages. We have Instagram, we have Facebook, and we have YouTube. I want to see which is the most interactive, which is the most exciting social media platform. So therefore, you have to interact. You have to ask your questions. You have to comment. And to do that, you have to be listening keenly to the presentations. We're going to welcome first to the program, Mr. Biles, who is a graduate of the Florida International University, where he pursued a degree in business administration with a focus on finance. And he has led in the business, in the banking and finance sector for over 10 years, joined Chukka 23 years ago. Did you remember that, Mr. Biles? That was 23 years ago that you joined the Chukka Caribbean family. And now he's managing partner of Chukka Caribbean and Adventure Tours. And I must add, having seen him play polo, I know he's passionate about the sport. If you know about the Tourism Linkages Network, then you know about the 5 networks that they have. And knowledge, of course, is one network, and another network is sport and entertainment. So Mr. Biles is right up the alley with that. And he is a true tourism stakeholder. Mr. Biles has served on several boards, including the board of the Tourism Enhancement Fund, the National Cruise Council of Jamaica, the Montego Bay Chamber of Commerce, Cargo Handlers Limited, Jamaica Vacations Limited. I need say no more. Mr. Biles, please introduce us to one of your passions, ESG, in the context of tourism.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So, ESG, I want to explain how I got to know ESG. And, it's environmental, social, and corporate governance. But about a year and a half ago, I was asked to present at a webinar that was set up by the World Bank on ESG. And my first answer to that was, what is ESG? And I ended up having to go to Google and start looking up ESG. And I realized it is exactly what we do in the attractions industry in Jamaica and around the world. So it was against that backdrop that my understanding really started. So the ESG, it's the social opportunities, it's environmental protection, and it's responsible governance. So going right in, what's ESG's role in tourism? Sustainable tourism development in a country like Jamaica requires building out a model around stakeholder capitalism. A lot of people have always heard about shareholder capitalism, but we have found that stakeholder capitalism is even more important. It is really understanding all of the players and potential players involved, their interest. And I will share with you that coming out of COVID, we got a much better understanding of the entire ecosystem and how integral they all play in the product. And it is really about building that stakeholder capitalism that we get all of what we should be getting from tourism, which is, everyone having a single purpose and to improve the appeal, delivery, and retention of the tourism for our country. So ESG promotes sustainable practices, social inclusivity, responsible governance, and long-term economic benefits. Skift is a research company that they do up-to-date research on the tourism sector internationally. And even though the title of this is Few Travelers Pay Extra for Sustainable Travel, you can see it's 32% of who is willing to pay more for travel. And why this is important is that if you are in tourism, you have to listen to your customer. And the growth in the ESG and the responsible tourism is only climbing. Apologies, I'm moving up and down a little too fast here. So more importantly, what we've found is alignment with the business partners. So we're finding that more and more of the hotel websites are promoting sustainability. This provides an incredible opportunity because with the alignment from our industry partners abroad, there is going to be greater opportunity for us to benefit from our ESG programs. So we'll start off with the social impact. And okay, the tourism in and of itself could and has operated in a certain way in Jamaica through the years. We have an all-inclusive concept. We have had attractions where people just go to those attractions and then go back to their hotel or go back to the ship. But what is happening now is more guests and visitors are wanting to experience the destination. They want to know and feel what the culture is like. They've always wanted to see the natural beauty of the country. But we're finding more and more travelers, crews especially, but also we have a growing number of Airbnb customers who are now 30% of who lands in the airport. And they're not staying in a hotel that has entertainment, etc., but they are looking for areas that they can go to, which are where they can freely walk seamlessly and safely and enjoy. The place needs to be fun, it needs to have entertainment, etc. So here it is, we have an incredible opportunity for integrating the traditionally marginalized into the tourism product. And what I mean by that is, if we take a look at where we are as a country, we have a real challenge in that 14% of our children between the ages of 12 and 14 are dropping out of school. If you look at that, and that's mainly boys, it could be as high as 20 to 25% are our boys dropping out of school in Western Jamaica, against the national average of 9%. We have various reasons why that's taking place, but if we take a look at what tourism offers and what we have naturally, Jamaicans are naturally very hospitable. And through that, we are able to provide an experience that guests love, want, and are attracted to. Of course, we need our guardrails. But once we are able to sit down, train, map it out, and put the proper order in place, we know that we are able to provide a better experience than all of our rivals. And I say that without any question, because I've had experiences where I've gone to countries to operate in Chukka, where people they've gone through tertiary education just to become guides. And I still have to carry my Jamaicans down there to bring out that experience side of the delivery. So what we're saying here is that ESG calls for the inclusion of traditional marginalized players by providing structured opportunities to create real livelihoods and empowerment through tourism value-added activities. And what are those? Those can be anything from the regular craft, it can be entertainment, it can be food, but we need to structure it, put it in places where it's aesthetically pleasing and it is convenient for our visitors to enjoy. I always have to say at this point, this is not charity, but value-added offerings through inclusion. I have a couple of case studies because many times people don't really believe that it is possible to get this type of structure. Downtown Montego Bay, I think it was 2021, after some shootouts that took place down there, the JCF went in and started to structure where the vendors were going to be, where the food vendors were going to be, getting the government agencies responsible for the various areas and getting them permits once they were compliant and gone through the training, which was done by TPDCO in the Team Jamaica training. We found that in doing so, when we went back to speak to the vendors 3 months in, they were much happier, they were making more money, and they said that something that we didn't even know before, that what this did was it put in protection for them against any form of thuggery that would have taken place before, where other people would come in with a bad man and they would be able to get the areas on the road and push them off into other areas. So what we're talking about when we talk about traditionally marginalized, we know that one of the things that they are most vulnerable to is the lack of oversight, order, and governance. And it's an important part of being able to provide a legitimate livelihood that is meaningful, to be able to put that proper order in place. Sam Sharp Square proved that to us. In the Falmouth Port, which is a little more tourism, but before I move on to that, something that's very interesting is that Sam Sharp Square, coming this October, there is a cruise line that will be sending people down to Sam Sharp Square, Montego Bay. They are very comfortable with the order, the structure, and what's taking place. And it has opened up that there is a old courthouse there that has been turned into a cultural center, and they want their guests to go to the cultural center and see everything that's in the town square. So it opens up opportunity now for even more money to be spent with those same vendors. Falmouth Port. In 2018, Royal Caribbean was about to pull ships due to the poor port ratings because of harassment. A team of private and public sector went in, evaluated the problem, and came up with solutions that were executed. We put in structured transportation dispatch, training the harassers to become tour guides and rickshaw operators. And that same previous pain point became the solution because now we have a wider, broader cross-section that deal with the surveillance and enforcement, because they're not going to allow anyone to hurt their own income. But it still needs, of course, that joined up government approach to keep the area clean, tidy, and to have that added force of both the JCF and other enforcement agents. So this comes to, there's a real opportunity in creating these economic zones. In preparing the tourist spaces, you know, we really need that alignment around all government. It can't just be the JCF, it can't just be the tourism, it has to be all aligned around the product and the experience. What is important here is through the ministry, these destination assurance councils have been set up in each of the resort towns. In those meetings, which actually I am missing my meeting this morning, but one of my other councillors is going to be chairing it. We have all of the agencies coming together for that meeting once a month, and we speak about compliance, we speak about you know, where the product is being hurt potentially, and then we get action lists coming out of it from each of the agencies. So it is really a great way to pull it all together. But these areas need to be more than just managed. They need to be fun, attractive, appealing, and safe for the patrons, so they will want to come and spend. We must plan for the area to be attractive and fun, whilst facilitating the surveillance and rapid response by law enforcement to send a message that where our inclusive programs are, will be protected, no different than a hotel. Enforcement is an act of compassion. And I say that because a lot of times we see enforcement and we think, you know, it's a big bat, big force. Is this really doing what we need? But it is. And I want to explain what the enforcing of the principles of ESG are all about. So it is critical that ESG, for the growth of the tourism dependent economy, that we are enforcing, but you can only enforce what you have educated the wider populace on. The ESG programs sustains tourism by protecting nature and culture, which is a great value proposition for the visitors. Visitors, this is what they crave, this is what they want. Even more so now after COVID, when we had the complete lockdown, there is far greater propensity of guests to want to get out and see this. The surveillance and enforcement safeguard the most vulnerable by securing their livelihoods and protecting key assets from illicit activities, and nature from those that would pillage. And I can't say it enough, and in fact, I do want to go back to the point I made earlier. When we removed all and sundry and decided that it would only be those that went through the pathway to be compliant in the downtown Montego Bay area, and you see that newspaper article up there, security forces getting kudos for street clampdown. It really was very, very, we're very happy to hear directly from the vendors how much better things were. The patrons were coming down there in the downtown area. They were more comfortable. They were spending more time. They weren't just trying to move through the area fast because there was proper order. And they spent more money. And the taxi operators also said the same thing. And if we had the time, you could sit down and read through the same article, which basically states that the one thing that they were asking for is that this will be sustained. And it would not just be something that would be for a short period of time. The taxi operators, who were the legal taxi operators, benefited. The vendors benefited. And more importantly, the people that we don't want in our public spaces had to get out. They had to leave. They could not come down there with the thuggery or any of that. So it's a win-win. And what is a win-win situation? If we get this working in all our resort areas, Jamaica gets a better guest experience in the freelance areas, which will attract more visitors, more so from the cruise and the Airbnb. The micro operators benefit from having clear pathway to a secure, protected space for growing business. And us locals are able to enjoy these spaces seamlessly and safely, even though they will be in a smaller designated area to start. But when we show that we can do it in those areas, there's a funny thing that happens. The areas right on the peripheral of that start to want to become part of it because it becomes a stronger economic space for everybody. So we see this as a way that tourism can drive a better, safer, more enjoyable Jamaica. Environmental benefits. You know, there's no question, we're showcasing nature. And by showcasing nature, you protect it. And all of us who operate end up protecting it. But I'll tell you something. You know that wherever, and Chukka operates in many locations. We have activity stations in about 8 locations around the island. We like to think that we find the spots of greatest beauty and then we find the activities to enjoy them. But what it does, first of all, wherever we operate, we normally hire from. So we get more people coming in from the communities. That they become trained in protecting the environment and why it's so important to protect the environment for tourism, but also for ourselves. So you start a program of educating throughout. Another thing that happens is that just being there, having the eyes and ears there, it starts to protect the nature. It starts to protect the environment. Simple things. If we are running a tour on the river, we have to do testing of the water quality once a month, above where we are, and below. If something comes up, that's a red flag that goes straight to NEPA, the environmental agency. And that immediately they come down and they start to identify where the issue is. So again, it's part of a surveillance that takes place. But we found that even simple things like, you know, there are people that go out and just start cutting down trees for lumber. They can't do it in the areas that we are. And because it becomes a livelihood for our team members and for others. So we get a far greater reach by doing so. The social inclusion. Well, I wanted to give a couple of examples. A drink, a pineapple drink, where you take the pineapple, cut it open, blend it, put the drink inside, put a little alcohol, that becomes an experience. All of a sudden, instead of just selling Pepsi and ginger ale, you're now buying directly from a farmer that's now finding its way in a value-added product that we all win in. And people are actually using it as, exactly as you see here, they use it as a Instagram moment. We'd like to think they also enjoy the drink. And then, again, artisans, real artisans, not people that are just buying and selling. But the artisans, you bring them into the attractions. And in doing so, they are actually doing the artwork in front of the guest. It's an added experience. So the painting is taking place there, the carving is taking place there, and so much more. What this does is they become a partner in the program. So, in one of our operations, they get 60% of the take of whatever they sell, and the attraction gets 40%. Again, this is value added. This is a partner being integrated smartly into the business. And very similar to that, there's no reason why when we have public spaces that we identify as tourism spaces that we want, for instance, Hip Strip in Montego Bay, Main Street, Ocherous, the Falmouth walk-off experience, we can integrate the smaller operators into these areas in a meaningful way. We just have to think it out. We need to use the proper planners. We need to bring the architects in, design it out, and make sure that it is meeting the guest experience. And we map it out, as Jessica will be able to tell you even more on mapping out the guest journey. What's that experience going to be like? What are all the touch points? And you do it from a value added from the perspective of the patron. Everybody benefits because more patrons want to go into the space. On the governance side, it's really about leadership selling the vision of a bigger, better, more responsible tourism that protects our nature. And our minister is always driving that, and our nature, history, and culture for the benefit of all. But it also requires accountability. It requires that we set out the plans, that we have the metrics in place, that we openly share that and report that in a way that everybody can see how we're doing. So that is an important part. What gets measured gets done. As well as putting in the required facilitation that we need. And I say this without any apology. We Jamaicans, we are the most incredible personalities. We have capacity to do so much more. We bat way above our weight and above the average. And that's because we don't see the boundaries. But that also is what can hurt us sometimes, because if we don't see the boundaries, we cross the boundaries. We've crossed the boundaries for music. We've crossed the boundaries for sport. We've crossed the boundaries for politics, thought leadership. It goes on and on and on, right? But equally, we can cross the boundaries in ways that we shouldn't, and that can hurt the whole. And we need to make sure that we have strong surveillance and enforcement, and that we put out what the guardrails are, because that's when we as Jamaicans truly flourish. Stakeholder capitalism started in the beginning and bringing it back now. Everybody is talking about AI. Well, this is what AI generated. By building on the principles of stakeholder capitalism, tourism can foster sustainable growth, enhance stakeholder trust, and contribute to a more inclusive and equitable society, whilst creating long-term value for all stakeholders involved. So, in conclusion, we say there's no plan B. Well, there's no planet B either. The importance of ESG in tourism is that, in my opinion, tourism actually provides greater value to be shared through the ESG programs. So it is almost like a self-funding ESG. But it's also the right thing to do, because we've got to save our planet. And if we don't start to do our part, we all know what's happening with global warming. We're seeing heat that we've never felt in, I can't recall feeling. We're seeing changes in weather patterns. We're seeing rising tides. It is a time that it's still not too late, and that we have to take a more collective responsibility in doing our part in the ESG. So sustainable tourism, creating a positive and lasting impact on our environment and our communities for the greater good of all. Thank you, and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Biles. You've just heard from Mr. John Biles, Managing Partner at Chukka Caribbean and Adventure Tours. And I picked up so many gems from that. Who doesn't love a triple win situation? A win, win, win. Win for the environment, win for companies, win for locals. I also love that bit about there is no plan B and there's no planet B either. And we really need to have that squarely in focus, especially as we speak about sustainability. I had a comment here from YouTube, and I want to thank Susan the Campus for a comment. She actually agreed with you, Mr. Biles, regarding the Airbnb and the new travelers that we have now, who are themselves more environmentally aware and also more focused on ESG, not just from the corporate perspective, but also from the individual responsibility aspect of it. We also have questions for you, and I know you're prepared for your questions. You mentioned, as you spoke to, what Chukka has been doing as it relates to ESG. And you did say it's the right thing to do. We should do the right thing, right? But how do you incentivize other companies, other small, medium, micro-sized tourism enterprises to operate like Chukka? Because not everyone has innate altruism.
So, because of the importance of ESG, and I'm not sure if everybody's aware, there was the Paris Agreement that was signed by the various governments. They have a thing called the Golden Rule. Who has the Golden Rules? So what is taking place is that through all of the international banks and funding, they're starting to provide, let's just call it slightly lower rates of interest for ESG proven ventures, companies, and they are looking for that, because under the Paris Agreement, they all need to be ticking that box. That in itself is going to start driving more of the attractions, the hotels, etc., to start looking at this. Number two is, as I mentioned earlier, the hotels and everyone is starting to promote the ESG because it is something that the customers want. The customers are both the business-to-business partners, but also the direct consumers coming, as you saw, 32% are willing to pay more for the ESG.
Thank you, Mr. Biles, for that response. And I also noted from your presentation, really, it's almost as the Chinese say their philosophy, that in terms of the word for crisis, it's a crisis, but there's an opportunity. And we see how we're making the opportunities from the challenges. But the question I have here for you, unfortunately, many times we have to wait for something bad to happen before we realize we need to change our way of operating. We see the benefit of ESG and coordination to give it life, but how do you recommend we change the culture so that it would be prioritized from top to bottom proactively and not reactively?
Yes, I mean, it's through education. It's what's in it for the individual, and explaining more and more of how ESG adds value for us, for future generations. And it's more about the education. But you know, whatever way we get to a place, whether it is through crisis or otherwise, the point is it provides a critical juncture that allows that education. It opens our minds to hearing more. So really, the opportunity is now to try and communicate what needs to be communicated.
Thank you. And also noting your guardrails, having your boundaries, and then after setting your boundaries, knowing how to surveil, having your surveillance and your enforcement mechanisms in place. Thank you so very much. And we have Natasha Parchment. Thank you, Natasha Parchment from YouTube, saying, thank you, JB, John Biles, excellent info. And I agree. And now we're going to move to our next speaker. And of course, you know, ESG, we have the environmental, we have the social, we have the governance or the corporate governance aspect. And when you speak about the social impact, as was touched on in Mr. Bell's presentation, we really want to ensure that tourism is playing its part in advancing the actual communities in which you have these tourism attractions on display and on offering to your tourists. Now we have Dr. Chanel Fingal Robinson, who holds a Bachelor of Arts as well as a Doctorate of Philosophy in Geography from UWI Mona. Go Pelicans, I have to say that, yes. She currently works as the Social Development Specialist at the World Bank, where she provides policy advice to governments and other regional and national organizations on how to sustainably implement multi-sectoral development initiatives. She designed and led the implementation of the Port of Kingston's Corporate Social Responsibility Program. So you're certainly no stranger and definitely an expert in this area. And I have to add, when she speaks about even her own self beyond the work, you know, when you go into the office and you do your job, for her, this is also a passion, especially on the E, the environment, and the S, the social side. She serves as a secretary of the Jamaican Women in Coffee organization, which I think is wonderful as it touches on working with women and then ensuring that they're adopting sound, environmentally sound practices. I think through all of this, we speak, the virtual forum says tourism and ESG. Really, we're looking at sustainable tourism. So Dr. Fingal Robinson, over to you.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So, I mean, as we heard earlier, ESG really encompasses a lot of different things, but I saw in my presentation that I would focus on two specific things that I think are important to ESG, and that would be gender equality and the circular economy. So let's look at understanding ESG. So environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, is a term that really came about probably in the early 2000s. And since then, as a concept, it has really grown and is significant to all types of businesses across the globe, regardless of their size or their industry. And I gave an example there of the UK band Coldplay that just released very recently, a few weeks ago, their first sustainability report about their tour. So it shows you that it doesn't matter whether you're in tourism, whether you're in manufacturing, whether you're in banking, or whether you're a rock group, that ESG and sustainability is important to you. And a lot of these entities want to be associated with good ESG practices for various reasons. It can increase your long-term sustainability. It also attracts investors because, you know, in today's world, investors want to be associated with companies that are doing good, that are sustainable. It also helps to build brand loyalty. John mentioned that, you know, there's a rise in people wanting to use their consumerism to have positive impacts on society. So if they feel as though your brand does that, they'll be loyal to you and they'll continue to patronize you. It can increase your financial performance as well. And there are some studies that show that companies that have a really good integrated ESG strategy actually earn up to 20% more than those that don't. And of course, with all of these aspects coming together, it ultimately decreases your operating costs, you know, so it affects your bottom line in a positive way. So what is ESG? It's an overarching strategy or framework that adjusts an organization's business practices to improve sustainability. And we also heard about the whole idea of stakeholder capitalism. So it's very important that stakeholders are involved. It's a stakeholder-centric approach, and it shows that sustainability is not just about environment, because a lot of people think that sustainability is just about the environment, but it also encompasses your social impact as well as your good governance practices. And it's also important to know that a good ESG strategy needs to transcend all aspects of your business. So it can, many times it's relegated to maybe your environmental and social division, or maybe your corporate social responsibility division, but it actually needs to be a part of your marketing, your legal, procurement, every aspect of your business in order for it to be completely successful. So in terms of ESG and tourism, if we look at it in terms of the environmental, it would be reducing the ecological footprint of tourism activities. So an example of that would be like reducing the amount of water you use, or probably turning to renewable energy sources. In terms of social, it looks at how tourism can benefit the local communities. It can preserve cultural aspects and also promote human rights. So we can look at sourcing your raw materials from local communities, or maybe perhaps preserving a cultural heritage item within the community in which the tourism enterprise operates. And in terms of governance, it looks at integrity and transparency in the governance of the tourism operations. So for that, it could be many things, but in ways that we look at could be your hiring practices. Do you have fair hiring practices or transparent hiring practices? Now, ESG has grown very much in importance in tourism, and this is for a variety of reasons. First of all, tourism contributes significantly to climate change, and we look at greenhouse gas emissions and our whole carbon footprint as we move from one place to the other. It also contributes to the depletion of resources as well. Tourism also can have impacts on communities that are not so positive. It can impact their culture, it can impact their customs, and it can impact their access as well to resources. So sometimes we give the example of when hotels are developing along the North Coast or anywhere in the world, it can reduce the access of persons to the beaches that they're accustomed using. Investing in ESG can help promote long-term economic sustainability and resilience. And as we also heard again, that there has been an increase in demand for more sustainability in travel. People want to spend their dollars more responsibly. And I have two statistics there that look at, that Gen Z travelers are willing to pay up to 25% more for tourism, for sustainable tourism options. And then Booking.com did a study in 2021 among its users, and it says that 83% of global travelers think that sustainable tourism is vital to the industry. So we see how important ESG can be in this tourism industry. And because it's so important to the tourism industry and generally, we have a lot of these organizations are now embarking on what we term greenwashing, which is kind of a negative impact of the whole idea of ESG. And what that is basically that you overstate or you mislead, give misleading statements about the level of impact of your sustainability or the level of how sustainable your organization or your business is. And I gave 3 examples here of 3 airlines that have been all accused of overstating, facts about their lower carbon emissions. Most recently Delta, but also we have examples here of Ryanair and KLM. So so as we go overarching aspects of, ESG, let me look at the 2 specific aspects that I want to discuss today. So gender equality. So women are about 60 to 70% of the workforce in the tourism and hospitality industry. But in spite of that, they're less likely to be managers than men. And in fact, if you look across the boards of the largest hotel chains in the world, only about 25% of their board compositions are women. Right. And because of that, they also are more likely to earn less than their male counterparts. In fact, UN Women has estimated that in tourism, women earn about 14.7% less than males in the same jobs. They're also more likely to be involved in more informal employment, so like street vending or craft making, things that are more informal. And they face a lot of sexual harassment as well, although just to say it's not only limited to women, but women do probably face it at, a higher proportion than men. And both as workers, so workers in the tourism industry, but as well as travelers. And that I think is something that's very important, especially as in today's world, we have the rise of the solo female traveler. So the whole aspect of women being exposed to sexual harassment is important for that particular subsect of the tourism industry. And just to go into that a little bit, the importance of that whole idea of harassment and the solo female traveler is so significant that in 2017, Thomson Reuters Foundation released the ratings of danger to women in 19 of the world's largest megacities. Now, I mean, they ranked Cairo as the most dangerous and London, Tokyo, and Paris as the least dangerous. And while in a way, that rating could be a little problematic because if we think about the aspects of global north versus global south, etc. But it just goes to show how important women take these types of lists and how important it is to women to feel safe in a tourism destination. Coupled with that, you have a lot of these travel pages, and I gave some pictures there of these travel pages and travel websites that have, specific posts that are dedicated towards telling women where the safest places for them to go. And on the flip side, also where some of the places that are not so safe for them to go. So as I said, as we have the rise in this whole idea of solo female traveler, the whole idea of safety and security becomes very important to tourism. And so therefore, the whole implementing gender equality is a critical component of ESG in the tourism industry. It can create a more diverse and inclusive tourism sector, which benefits both the local communities as well as the businesses that are involved in the tourism industry. And what this ultimately does is that it impacts positively on the sustainability and the long-term success of the industry, because people want to travel to places and patronize businesses where they can feel safe and they don't feel as though, and they also want to patronize businesses that they feel are having positive impact and that are, treating males and females equally. So there are many different ways in which this can be done, and I just give some examples here. So one can be the whole idea of providing equal employment opportunities. So you look at your recruitment and promotion practices, as well as ensuring equal pay for equal work. There's also the aspect of supporting women-owned businesses. And I have a graphic there that talks about agritourism linkages. This is happening in Tanzania. And so this is a direct way. So you can buy your agricultural inputs directly from female farmers. But there are other ways this can be done. So for example, you can promote spaces You can promote spaces in which, women can form partnerships to help with procurement. You can also promote platforms for networking for these women-owned tourism-related industries. And, companies can also provide financing for women-owned businesses, as well as, support in terms of mentorship for women-owned entrepreneurs. And then, we talk about safety and security, the whole idea of having a safe and inclusive travel experience. John mentioned the idea of Sam Sharp Square and the Falmouth Pier and how, they were able to improve their safety and security, to help with the tourism project. So that's very important as well. So education and awareness campaigns are very significant towards that aspect of gender equality in ESG and in tourism. So let's look at the circular economy. So what we have now traditionally is what we call the linear economy. So it's about taking, making, using, and then disposing. But what we want to go towards, and what some industries have been going towards, is the circular economy, where you borrow, you make, you reuse, and recycle. And it's really something that is trying to minimize waste and trying to minimize the amount of resources that you use and to use more, renewable resources. And when it's designed well, a circular economy can protect the environment. It can increase the economy, improve the economy itself, and it also can elevate social justice. So let's look at circular economy and ESG for tourism. It allows for the minimizing of waste and the maximizing of resource efficiency. And it's a way in which tourists can travel with purpose. And we know that they do want to travel with purpose. They want to spend their dollars and know that it's making a real positive difference in people's lives. It can create new jobs. Circular economy businesses can come out of it. And it leads to multiplier positive effects. So it can help to reduce climate change, the impacts of climate change. And we know that we're all feeling it now. It's so hot, the hottest it's ever been in the world. So it can help that. It can also, and further from that, it can also help us to achieve our sustainable development goals, because many of the aspects that are included in the circular economy speak directly to those sustainable development goals. So what are some of these initiatives that we could implement in tourism for the circular economy? So firstly, let's look at sustainable supply chain. So we can look at buying organic food, buying food from local suppliers, which will reduce transportation costs. And of course, this in reducing transportation costs, it also will reduce your carbon emissions as well if it's closer. We can also look at having codes of conduct for our suppliers, where we encourage them to have good hiring practices, maybe to not employ any slave labor, to not underpay people, those types of things. And yeah. Secondly, we have waste reduction, reuse, and recycling, which is, I think, the one that most people are familiar with. And effective waste management will help to minimize the amount of waste that gets into the landfill. And how we can do this many ways, but one way is upcycling, so using things again to upcycle, as well as separating waste. And many hotels we see already do that now. You go to a hotel and they'll have their recycling bin so that they help you to separate that waste. And then the idea of collaborative consumption. We know about Airbnbs, we know about Uber, so it's encouraging tourists to share rather than having one, consume it individually, to share that experience together. There's some hotels that provide even electric bicycles for their guests so that they can go and do their tours using that, the sharing idea. And we can also have community-based initiatives where the tourists or travelers and the locals can come together and share in sharing and cooperation. So I wanted to give an example of a circular economy initiative. This is the Crown Plaza Towers in Copenhagen, Denmark. And they are one of the leaders in really implementing the circular economy into their hotel. So they've done it in many ways. This is not all of the ways, but I want to just show some of the ways that it could be done, and it could probably be applied elsewhere as well. So first, their room heating mechanism is linked to their booking software. So if there's no guest staying in the room, then the room isn't heated, right? They use food waste to produce biogas in their basement, and they use this biogas now to power the hotel. They're also one of the first EU hotels to have an integrated solar panel park, and they also use this as a renewable source of energy to power them. They engage in responsible supply chain practices and management, so they do have their suppliers sign a code of conduct to which they have to adhere. They do buy organic products for their food and beverages. And they also source a lot of their raw materials in the local area, which is like, they say within a 300-kilometer radius. Of course, in the Caribbean, it would be a smaller radius than that, but for them, that's a small radius. And their hotel products, their shampoo bottles, their toothbrushes, etc., are made from this organic material that if you bury it, it decomposes within 3 months. So that's a way in which they're able to really reduce the amount of waste, really reduce the amount of energy that they input into their system. Now, I looked at the circular economy and I looked at gender, but it's also important to integrate. They're able to be integrated with each other. It's not just look at them in a vacuum, right? And that's because they're complementary and they can be combined in an ESG strategy fairly easily. And how this can be done, we can look at equal participation of males and females in decision making when you're designing how that circular economy would look for you. You also look at equal skills development for men and women. I should say men and women there, for men and women. So we don't just focus on giving one more skills than the other. We try to make them on an equal footing. And it's important to know that women are very key in resource utilization and waste management, particularly in communities and in households. So a circular economy can actually create waste reduction programs that create opportunities for women to be able to use their expertise in that area. And of course, you can ensure that the distribution of the benefits of the circular economy activities are equally, distributed amongst males and females within the communities. And no ESG strategy is fulfilled unless you actually you measure it and you report on it. So it's important to establish clear KPIs. So for gender or circular economy, we could look at maybe, how much waste is reaching the landfill. For gender, we could look at the proportion of your managers that are females. And then you need to audit and track these KPIs on a regular basis and then produce reports. Remember we talk about ESG being about stakeholders and very stakeholder centric. So we need to report now back to our stakeholders what we've been doing and how our initiatives have been successful. And so, it will help them to want to support us in that aspect when they know, what we've done. And finally, my final thoughts on this is that ESG has a really significant impact in tourism, and we've seen that, right? And if we can align the growth of tourism with the growth of ESG, with environmental, social, and governance consideration, it will be a great thing for the world. But aligning this is not just the job of maybe businesses. It also has to be a collaborative effort between communities, between NGOs, governments, tourism enterprises, etc., everybody. And once this is done, it can contribute to a sustainable future for not only communities, not only for the countries, but also for the world in general. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fingal Robinson. That's Dr. Chanel Fingal Robinson, specialist, social development and sustainability specialist. It's almost like a tongue twister there, working at the World Bank. Thank you for your presentation. And I think this connects quite nicely with what was done by Mr. Biles earlier, especially as he spoke to surveillance and enforcement. And you've now added the dimension of ensuring that you're measuring and reporting. All of these things are linked to accountability, really, as we move forward for sustainable tourism. I do have a question for you, especially as you spoke to the KPIs and you listed a few based on the focus of your presentation, gender equality and the circular economy, about the amount of waste to reach in landfills or your percentage of managers that are females. And I want to say, thankfully, here the KPI as it relates to gender equality is looking quite good. So we can applaud the Tourism Linkages Network for that. The question I have for you: how do we balance nature preservation with infrastructural development? The KPI on one side may be about infrastructure development like roads, rooms, attractions, but the ESG KPIs for environmental sustainability are still not priority. And in many cases, no one is even willing to spend the money to measure and monitor. That was a question designed for you, Dr. Fingal.
Yeah, that is a mouthful. I would say that, it's a good question. I would say that a lot of this, because this is what I really do on a day-to-day, letting governments understand why it's important to, integrate environmental and social into your development plans. So it's about really many things. You have to let them understand that you can't just, so stakeholder engagement, really, let's say that. Stakeholder engagement and discussing with the communities and, letting them understand that it's not just about building for today. So it's okay to build a road here. Many governments or entities would love to just build a road, and if there are people living alongside the road, okay, bye, just go away. But it's not about that. You have to understand, how you building this road can impact their livelihood, and then understand how you can help them improve their livelihood, through that road. So you have to let them get that kind of, understanding or acceptance that it's not just about development now, but, further along the line. Also, as much as I absolutely hate to introduce initiatives to people talking about the bottom line, because I feel it shouldn't be all about that. But you do have to recognize that your bottom line will be impacted positively. It might not be today or tomorrow, but when you think long term, your bottom line will be impacted positively. You also have to think about the fact that, do you really want to implement a project and then all these people come and protest and say, oh, you haven't done it sustainably? What does that do for your reputation? So you just have to find ways of, getting people to understand that, environmental, social governance is very, significant to integrate into any development project that's been happening.
Thank you. Fantastic. I'm going to share some of the comments from YouTube. And by the way, I had thrown out the gauntlet. I had thrown the challenge with social media platform really is popping. And guess what? It is YouTube. Wow. Instagram Live, but YouTube is in the lead. And we have Natasha Parchment. Thank you, Natasha. You're so very active and we welcome it. She says to you, Dr. Fingal Robinson, facts, and thank you so much. We also have a question from Jay. in terms of, are there any circular initiatives in the planning phase in the Caribbean that you may know of, companies who are championing circular economic practices currently, or perhaps any funding options for boutique hotels that would want to participate in circular economic practices? I must say, in our view, as them very bright, that are coming in.
I'll say, that also is a very good question. I do know, I will not try to say that I know exactly what is happening in the rider tourism industry. I do know that places in Jamaica, for example, like the Development Bank of Jamaica, does have initiatives that will give loans or grants to companies that want to grow. And one of the requirements is that they have to adhere to environmental and social requirements. So that, I believe, could be a way in which, if you have a company that wants to implement a circular economy type in enterprise, that could be somewhere that you could go and get funding for them.
Thank you. So thank you again, Dr. Chanel Fingal Robinson. And I just want to share, the Tourism Linkages Network has organized this virtual forum, and they're walking the walk. They're talking the talk and walking the walk. So, you spoke about on one of your slides, empowering women in agriculture, sustainable tourism, because we speak about the linkages, which really is what the Tourism Linkages Network is about. And I'm going to throw that question out there for our viewers online. Can you type, what are the 5 networks for that? I already listed one as it relates to Mr. Biles and his love for polo, and I did list another one as it relates to the activity that we have this morning. So tell me the full 5 networks for the Tourism Linkages Network. But what they're also doing, there's an agriculture technical working group, and they have done an agricultural food safety manual for tourism suppliers, which is designed to assist farmers, agro-processors, and manufacturers, and give a clear guide for the handling of all food-related items utilized by tourism. I wonder how many persons online knew that. If you knew that, you need to raise your hand up in YouTube or on Facebook or on Instagram. Also, as we move into ecotourism, because as I said, this discussion here is really centered on sustainable tourism. There is a Beaches, Parks, and Trails guidebook. Did you know that? There's a Beaches, Parks, and Trails guidebook for Jamaica, a first of its kind, which forms part of the Ministry of Tourism's mandate to support, enhance, and develop Jamaica's health and wellness product and package, promote, and market it as an important tourism niche area. And if you don't believe me, you need to go to the Tourism Linkages Network page, and you'll find their page on ISSU. If you're familiar with that, that's ISSUU. Find the Tourism Linkages Network Jamaica page, and you can download all of these guidebooks and manuals for free. Now we move to our final panelist, the CXO. I really do like this one, the CXO. I think I'm going to take that on for myself. I'm going to be a CXO in my own life. Miss Jessica Shannon. She holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and a Bachelor of Science in Finance and International Business, serving as a global industry leader with extensive consulting experience in market development, market positioning, and customer experience, change management, and organizational transformation. This is transformational. In her current role at the Sandals Resorts International, she leads the global strategy for innovation experiences based on evolving trends, evolving travel demand, and shifting world scenarios for a best-in-class experience across the entire guest journey from booking to returning home. And I'm noticing, like Mr. Biles here, we have a focus with finance and international business. It is really good to see. As you said, Dr. Fingal Robinson, when you speak about the bottom line, we're so focused on business. But here are 2 business majors who are focused on ESG and the impact that it can have for the environment and for our society. Ms. Shannon, over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you once again for inviting me. I am humbled and honored to be part of this esteemed panel today with my colleagues. And I am more than honored to be able to share a bit about the Sandals Resorts experience in ESG and our journey. It has a long and steep story, which I'll share in a few moments, but also a lot more to come, which is absolutely exciting. as you rightly said, I'm very passionate about ESG, and so have been listening with bated breath for the last hour to my colleagues and have been taking notes myself. So thank you to both of them for your insights. So ESG for Sandals, I mean, one of the unique things I believe is ESG, before it was a synthesized thing, was very important to the DNA and the ethos of Sandals Resorts. Our founder, the Honorable Gordon Butch Stewart, recognized from the inception of his first resort and hotel in Montego Bay the importance of taking care of community and taking care of the environment around it. And so from day one, I think the company has very much prioritized society, social impacts, and our environments, along with, of course, as John mentioned, good governance and making sure that we have the right public order in place, that we have an inviting ecosystem and a safe ecosystem. And so ESG really started some 41 years ago nearly at Sandals Resorts. And we intend, and as I share some of the things that we're looking at and doing, we intend to continue to serve as that leader within the ESG community. We say often we don't want to lead ESG in the Caribbean region, but we want the Caribbean to be the global leader in ESG. Unfortunately, we are one of the most vulnerable to the climate change impacts. And so we need to turn that to a strength and become the center for resilience. Our Minister of Tourism in Jamaica is very passionate about that. And we feel the same way, that we really need to own and embrace our leadership role in the space of resilience and ESG broadly. And so first I wanted to share with you today a few of the trends that we see when we look across the global marketplace in ESG. What are we seeing in tourism? And then how that translates into Sandals. Mr. Biles also mentioned the Paris Agreement. Within the hotel space, it is top of mind. When you look at what the industry needs to do to achieve the goals that were set by the Paris Agreement, and the goals that were set is they need by 2030, we need to reduce the carbon footprint of the entire industry by 66%. And by 2050 by 90%. So that is a steep undertaking for anyone. So what are people looking at and how are they looking to achieve it? From an environmental standpoint, the trend that we are seeing is people bucketing things into two areas. We're seeing people look at the ways in which they can reduce their environmental impact and their environmental footprint, but also the ways in which they can become more resilient to the climate change impacts that are already occurring. I think everyone sitting in Jamaica recognizes, unfortunately, climate change is on us and upon us. Looking at the summer temperatures, the water temperatures, they are unprecedented. So we also need to be prepared. And so that's that second piece. A few areas that we see most of the industry focus on, or many industry trends on, is, renewable energy, reducing carbon footprint and trying to get to net zero. Broadly across the business community, net zero is defined as not creating any positive or any carbon footprint, so to say. So any carbon that you do have to use as part of your business and your operations, you would purchase carbon offsets and purchase and invest in initiatives that are contributing to reducing greenhouse gas emissions very actively. So net zero is a huge area within renewable energy. To achieve renewable energy, people are looking at reduction in energy efficient buildings and construction. They are often looking at alternative energy sources. So whether that's solar, whether that's wind, whether that's thermal, looking at ways in which they can reduce the reliance on traditional energy and move to a more sustainable base of energy. Habitat restoration. Companies are looking at and making sure that environmental habitats are restored for residents to be able to appreciate and use them, for guests to be able to continue to appreciate and use them, and importantly, for the animals and others who are reliant upon the ecosystems to be able to utilize them both today and for tomorrow. So maintaining those that are already preserved and helping to restore those where damage has occurred is a key area of focus. And the last one I'll just showcase on the environmental, that's a trend that we're seeing, is waste and water reduction. So waste reduction, I think has been discussed, but really looking at how you are reducing the amount of waste in the environment, reducing whether it's through recycling or things that can be compostable. How do we reduce the net waste that goes into landfills, that goes into our gullies, of course, but then also how do you reduce your water usage? They predict in the next 20 years, we are going to have a massive water scarcity, almost worse than the rest of climate impacts. So how do you reduce our water usage today and preserve everything we can? Most companies and most hotels are certainly looking at low flow faucets and toilets. They're looking at water reuse systems and ways to recapture and recatch water, wastewater treatment centers, etc. So those are areas that we're seeing on the environmental side. When we're looking at social side, I think it's important to recognize within the tourism space, we are a human-centric and human-focused business. Whether that is our team members who are the heart of every experience that our guests have, or our visitors who are our guests and livelihoods, it's important to never lose sight of the social protections and social promotion of social good that tourism can bring and should bring to the table as an industry. When we look at where the industry is going and some of the trends that we're seeing, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are huge areas of focus for many within the industry, making sure that they have a diverse workforce, making sure that they're promoting and empowering a wide variety of individuals, whether that's gender diversity, as my colleague mentioned so passionately, but also making sure that we have ethnic diversities and would say demographic diversity as well, so that we're not pulling from the same population, but have that great diversity of thought and we're empowering communities. Education and childcare programs is a clear area of focus, making sure that we're looking at the next generation. From a social good and an empowerment standpoint at a national level and at a community level, youth are really where it's at in terms of tomorrow's future. So making sure that companies are really looking to make sure that education and the right childcare programs are in place. It does also greatly impact today's workforce. Team members that have a safe and healthy and productive environment for their children are much better able and positioned to focus on their work. And it definitely helps with gender balance. Last area I'll mention that is a trend in an up and coming space, certainly within the tourism industry, but more broadly, and also increasing dramatically in a post-COVID environment, is a focus on physical and mental wellness and well-being. We see companies in the industry looking at making sure the team members have that ability to have physical health and wellness, whether that's access to nurse or treatment or medical care, preventive or detective, whether that is fitness facilities so that they can keep active and keep in shape, or whether that's providing healthy cuisines and healthy options for food, but also on the mental wellness side, making sure to prevent burnout, that people have that ability to be thoughtful and mindful, and also have channels if they have concerns that they can raise within the organization itself. So those are some of the areas on social we're seeing industry trends. And the last area of ESG, of course, is governance, and that's making sure that there is the right oversight, ethical businesses, transparency, to make sure that sustainably the entire ecosystem can thrive. And so some of the examples there in terms of trends we are seeing is board oversight, making sure that there is a diverse board that has some independence, but also diversity of skill sets to be able to understand and help oversee and drive businesses in the right direction. Within the organization or the companies itself, we are seeing a strong focus on structures and standards and processes, making sure that the structure is in place to allow for transparency and ethical business mentality, but also standards and processes to drive consistency across companies and across locations and across industries. The last one is as was mentioned earlier, public order. So governance isn't necessarily only within the four walls of a company or a business, but also the broader community. And so looking at what public order looks like within the communities and making sure that companies are looking to make sure that they play their role as a stakeholder within the broader community and are helping to drive and enforce public order, which is so vital to the success and the sustainability of the tourism product. And one thing that is absolutely for sure is that all private sector businesses, tourism specifically, are looking at investing in ESG. And they are looking at investing in ESG, both in the initiatives, so they are looking to do more and be more, but also in the monitoring and reporting. Was mentioned a couple of times finance and access to financing. I will echo the point that was made. Many financial institutions are either requiring ESG frameworks, policies, and reporting in place to be able to access financing on a go forward. But even those who are not requiring it are giving lower interest rates or concessionary financing for people who have strong ESG policies and are doing a lot to help the community and their stakeholders. So this is a really important focus and will continue to be, not only on the financial services side, but I will mention, because was mentioned earlier, the cost and the benefit. We've seen a number of statistics thrown around in the past hour, but we're seeing that more than 50% of travelers are saying it's not only a nice to have, it's a need to have in order for them to book a vacation. And so when you look at the business figures, it is a clear imperative. It's do good, it's feel good for society and for communities, but it's also an absolute mandate when it comes to driving business growth going forward. So those are some of the industry trends that we are seeing. To turn now specifically to what's near and dear to my heart is the Sandals Resorts experience. Our executive chairman, Mr. Adam Stewart, founded and initiated the Sandals Foundation some more than 14 years ago now, with an express role of giving back to our Caribbean communities. And so I'll talk a little bit about what the foundation is doing, because they're an absolute force. Our executive director, Heidi Clark, is an absolute force of nature in terms of bringing Pan-Caribbean solutions through the foundation within the realms of ESG. And so leading and paving the way for 8 Caribbean countries, looking at 100% of the donations going into directly project funding. A few of the areas just to share of the projects in which the foundation works. Education is one of the big pillars and areas of focus. So within the Caribbean communities, our foundation looks to upgrade classrooms to make sure that children have the right infrastructure to be able to learn, and an environment that's conducive to learning and maximizing their education, but also looking at supplies. So if both teachers and students are lacking supplies, impossible for them to be able to educate or be educated. So what type of supplies are required for school systems to run appropriately in our small communities around the Caribbean? And then also promoting education quality through helping with capacity programs with teachers and mentorship models with students as well. So increasing and enhancing the promotion and the quality of education are some of the few areas that we're working on from a foundation perspective on education. Next area of focus is the communities at large. And the community pillar and program within the foundation is very diverse. But to name a few, our teams are supporting youth music and sports programs. One of my favorite new initiatives around sports programs is our teaming and our partnerships with local and international players in Curacao. So we teamed up with Ajax from the Netherlands. We've teamed up with local NGOs to be able to turn fishing nets into football nets for the schools, to be able to help and increase and enhance their sports programs and help them mentor and teach them about the sport of football and help build their skills and give them productive team building exercises and also community. But we also provide job training at the adult level and education and disaster relief efforts. When we're entering hurricane season, of course, that's top of mind, but we do have a laser focus on any impacted areas in helping provide disaster relief efforts. And these are just a few of the areas in community. The last pillar I'll touch on the foundation is environment. And I know we've talked a lot about environment because it is absolutely so important and critical to protect our environment in the region and in Jamaica. A few areas that we can touch on in terms of the foundation's activities and environment: coral conservation, marine protections, tree regrowth, and turtle conservation. So on the North Coast, obviously, with the endangered turtles, we are intimately involved in helping to do the turtle hatch and the turtle release. We even are able to bring some of our guests to assist in that as well from an advocacy effort so that they can bring that experience home and make sure that everyone is aware of the important work that's being done, but also looking at regrowth and restoration of mangroves in the marine protection and the tree regrowth side, and really focused on helping both our endangered ecosystems, but also our endangered animals within the environment, and making sure that they are protected for today and tomorrow. So these are some of the areas the foundation is seeking to assist, but we are growing by leaps and bounds on the foundation side. I will mention that Sandals Foundation never works alone. So we work with local communities, but also local NGOs and international donors and aid agencies to make sure that together we are much more powerful than any of one of those entities are. So we work with the local communities, but in concert with everyone within that rest of the broader community. And so one of the things that's important from a Sandals experience, it's not just enough that we work through the foundation. We recognize that it is good for business. And we talked about the bottom line. It is good. It is good for business. And for it to be sustainable, it must be good for business. So we drive ESG and sustainability programs throughout the entire operations of Sandals Resorts International and all of our resorts. And I'm going to share just 4 of them in the interest of time today, but could speak for another hour or 2 hours about some of the other initiatives that we're working on and we have in the pipeline. Linkages, of course, I have to mention linkages, given that, our tourism linkages network is so germane to this conversation. But of course, our executive chairman is a leader in the linkages space. And so from a Sandals Resort side, we are so heavily focused on making sure that we are purchasing and buying local across all walks. 90% of our produce in our Jamaica resorts is harvested locally. And just to give people a sense of scale, that's 5.4 million pounds per year purchased from local farmers in Jamaica. Another point of trivia that I find interesting, our eggs are 100% locally sourced. That's 290,000 eggs a year in Jamaica alone. And so we do talk the talk, and we also walk the walk in the linkages space to make sure that we are purchasing locally in every extent possible. 81% of all of our Jamaica products are purchased by local suppliers and distributors. Sorry, let me fix the slides here for a second. Education. From an education standpoint, we have a Sandals Corporate University, which is also a passion across the entire company and organization to really build the capabilities and the capacity of the industry and of our team members. At Sandals, we are an organization where someone can join the company not being able to read or write, and by the time they have left the company, be able to have the equivalent of a master's degree. So it's really exciting. We have more than 16,000 have graduated from our hospitality program and training, and we have 12,000 team members who have enrolled in additional courses within the Sandals Corporate University curriculum to be able to gain personal and professional enrichment. We've issued 34,000 certificates under the Sandals Corporate University umbrella, and we are, while it is not new, it is just getting started. Our expansion plans are absolutely extraordinary. As we just opened Sandals Dunn's River, just a point to note, before the hotel ever opened its doors, each team member had at least 600 hours of education provided by the company to make sure they had the tools, the capability, and the confidence they needed to serve our guests well. Mr. Biles mentioned Jamaicans are by nature warm and genuine and friendly, and building on that base and helping to make sure that the best of who they are comes out to all of our guests is a passion, and we are able to report back that our team members all have that type of education and are all so excited to be a part of a program that does continuously build on their skill sets and their education. Conservation. We've talked about reducing our waste, and as I mentioned, that is an industry trend. One of the areas that we look at waste reduction, we look at waste reduction in a number of ways, either through composting, through recycling, but also through pure reduction. And so I give just an example or a point of trivia here. By reducing our single-use plastics, is a journey that we've been on for a number of years now. We've been able to remove more than 21.5 million straws, 1.4 million takeaway containers that are used historically made of plastic, and 1.2 million plastic lined cups. And that's just one initiative out of 14 that we're focused on in reducing our waste. And I will mention on this one, as it relates to single-use plastics, we are going further, and our guests are asking for it, quite honestly. So we will be installing reusable water systems to be able for guests to refill their water bottles rather than continuing to use single-use plastics and things like that. So we're continuing to push the envelope as it relates to conservation to make sure we're leading the way. The last area I'll mention is around climate, and I'll start where I'll end in this case of examples where we did start on the environmental imperative, because it's so absolutely important to protect our planet. Every Sandals and Beaches resort participates in the EarthCheck program. EarthCheck is the world's leading science-based certification program, and for the tourism industry, and every one of our resorts participates in this. Some of the areas they look to measure and they monitor as part of their certification program are sustainability policies, whether you have smart rooms, whether you rely on solar energy, or in part or in whole, whether you use LED lighting, inverter air conditioners, whether you have wastewater treatment, composting. So it's across the board that they look at resorts and how they're managing their environmental impact. 17 of our resorts have the highest level certification for EarthCheck. And that's not enough for us. We will continue to go above and beyond what EarthCheck is asking, but we do want to hold ourselves accountable to an independent body and an independent standard to make sure that we are continuing to beat and exceed all of the expectations set forth by the international bodies. As we think about the future, more to come. So I mentioned some of the things that we're focused on and we're excited about and we're doing. All of this is in collaboration with the broader Jamaica tourism community, but we want to do more. So as future success factors, I'm just going to mention a couple in closing. One is increasing our collaboration. We have an incredibly visionary minister of tourism and leaders within the public sector community. And we have a fantastic group of tourism stakeholders on the private sector. And it will take all of us working together, the public and the private sector and every member of that stakeholder community, to be more and to do more as it relates to ESG. So we look for and we call upon everyone for more collaboration and more communication to make sure that we are becoming, and emerging into that true leader in the ESG space and community. We are also looking to continue to reduce our reliance on traditional energy sources and move to cleaner energy and lower energy usage overall. We are, as it relates to new buildings, looking to make sure that they are as energy efficient as possible and they are as low waste as possible. And so every new building we look at the different environmental impacts and how we can minimize and reduce that. And then in part with that, what can we give back to offset anything that we are using to get to as close as that net zero target as possible. With our existing resorts, I mentioned EarthCheck, but we are going beyond that to make sure that all of our existing resorts can be retrofitted to be as environmentally friendly as possible. And last but not least, we are continuing to invest in our team members and in our communities to make sure that we are maximizing the skills, the capacity, and the sustainability of our tourism teams and communities for today and for generations to come. So we'll stop there, see if there are any questions. But thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Shannon. You have Jessica Shannon, CXO. You know how much I love that C-suite title, Chief Experience Officer at Sandals Resorts International. And I think the passion that you all share for this area is certainly rubbing off. It's rubbing off on me. It's rubbing off on our participants. Directed to you, Dr. Fingal Robinson, we have a comment from Marshall Valentine, came in a little later, saying, wonderful presentation, exclamation mark. Also for Sandals as well to you, Ms. Shannon, we have from Natasha Parchment, those training figures are all caps, remarkable, go sandals, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. So you can see the excitement there. Now, even though we're discussing tourism and ESG, Jessica, I wonder if you have ESP, because all the questions that were coming in, you kept on answering them as they came in. But just for our viewers who are quite interactive, and we really love this, we appreciate it and welcome it. Please keep the comments and questions coming. We had what initiatives under the Sandals Foundation are geared towards ESG, the communities in which they operate, and you did respond to that quite clearly. I did like that example of the fishing nets now becoming the football, the goal net. I did quite like that one. There's also another question specific to Sandals Foundation in terms of, are there any initiatives that allow for the average man who might want to volunteer or to get involved in some of the activities that you're doing to drive the ESG strategies there? Is that something that Sandals welcomes and is open to, and how can they do that?
More than welcome. In fact, we have calls for volunteers all of the time. So if it would be possible, Ms. Turner, I'm happy to share the link where people can sign up to be volunteers. We host many volunteer opportunities for those who seek to get involved. We even have employee volunteer programs, but also certainly across the community and our guests. We like to get our guests involved as a way to make sure that they have an education and an understanding of the work that the foundation does and actively contribute to the success of the foundation and some of the impacts that we're having. And I will mention just a few of the other areas in which the foundation is operating in the ESG space, since there was a question on that. Everything from healthcare, in Jamaica, certainly we have in our more rural communities, dental programs and eye care programs to make sure that people can have the care and the access that they need. We have infant care centers in Antigua. We have, as I mentioned, the turtle hatcheries on the North Coast. We have reading road trips to make sure that we enhance the literacy programs within the schools, getting volunteers and guests to read and mentor with our young students. And we have a whole host of school building project, beach cleanup days, and reef cleanup days. So happy to share information about how people can get involved and volunteer more.
Right. Thank you. And I just want to add for our viewers that Ms. Shannon, as you can hear her passion and a deep passion for society and community building, she was a Peace Corps volunteer in Guyana. So all of her experience here is just playing out in her current role. Thank you, Ryan Matthew on YouTube, saying thank you for this invaluable session. Well done to all presenters. We have Natasha Parchment who says, yes, exclamation, exclamation, yes. The Plastic-Free July movement rejoices in the reduction of single-use plastic. I really love it. I don't think I've ever moderated a session, not even other virtual forums, the forums that I've done for TLN, that we've had this much excitement and passion from our viewers online. I also have another comment directed to Sandals, that you seem to be setting the tone for the ESG landscape in Jamaica and by extension the Caribbean where you operate. I know you just touched on how persons can volunteer in terms of interacting with some of the ESG strategies that you're uptaking, but what about, as we speak about MSMEs, which is the backbone of the Jamaica economy? Are you open, is Sandals open to doing workshops or maybe smaller local boutique hotels as to where they can begin as they start off on their ESG journey? This is in relation to other companies.
I think the answer is absolutely yes. Both Mr. Biles and myself, with our roles in the JHTA and other organizations, really take a strong sense of responsibility in helping to build the capacity and the capabilities within the MSME space. And so would love to share programs that could be tailored to smaller organizations that are just starting out on the ESG journey. As we talked about, part of being a leader in ESG is helping to support and mentor those around us and make sure that everyone has a life and a livelihood that can be sustainable. And so absolutely we can share, and what I would say to anyone who is an MSME, start small. It can be very overwhelming to think about everything all at once. But by doing one thing at a time, brick by brick, an entire house can be built. So not all of these things need to be addressed at one point in time, but we are happy to do follow-up workshops or sessions to really talk about what are the high impact things that small organizations can be looking at for big impact. And I think the other thing that's important to note as we look at smaller organizations and entities, guests really are differentially looking at those who have some of those sustainability measures in place. So I know sometimes the MSME community can think it's too much of a burden because they're small and they don't have a lot, but you can do a lot of things that are really low cost and actually attract more visitors and more guests into the space. And so I will go back to that win-win-win. It really is win-win-win for most, and it's quite capital light. Even the capital heavy projects where you look at construction and buildings, we are seeing a positive return by lowering the energy consumption. All of those things actually still do make for a lower cost in the long term.
Thank you. And your ESP was also at play again with this question from a user he goes by the name of Alien here on YouTube. He's wondering how we're crediting the ESG in these organizations. And I heard you mention EarthCheck, but please, if yourself or Mr. Biles or Dr. Fingal Robinson, if there are other organizations who also help to accredit and certify companies that are doing their best in the ESG mandate and space. And specifically, if there are any companies or any organizations in Jamaica who also do that, feel free to share. I'll begin with you, Ms. Shannon.
So as I said, we use EarthCheck, but from a construction standpoint within the industry, certainly LEED certifications are very powerful as an independent monitor as well. One of the things that is important to note on EarthCheck, particularly for some of those smaller organizations that you mentioned, there are local professionals who are certified to conduct EarthCheck audits. And I mention that because oftentimes you think someone needs to fly in and it becomes a very time-consuming effort, but we do have folks in Jamaica who are certified to conduct EarthCheck audits.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything to add from either Dr. Fingal Robinson or Mr. Biles on that point from your experience with the accreditation?
Well, there's Green Globe certification, but I mean, and there are others out there that are doing it. So they're basically just different levels of the certification.
Thank you, Mr. Biles. Dr. Fingal Robinson.
Well, I was going to talk about the Gender with Edge certification. So that looks at gender equality. So that is one that, can also,
Thank you. I saw Ms. Shannon vigorously concur with that.
As soon as you said Edge, it occurred to mind. It is a really powerful certification on the gender side.
Fantastic. Now, for viewers, you remember we have our sign language interpreter from PA. I'm going to tell you a little later on what PA means. You see, I'm here learning sign language. I've learned PA and I've learned yes. And if you've been following our Jamaican sign language interpreter, you might have picked up a bit more than I did. Now, when we started off, even before the virtual forum began, perhaps many of us had no idea what ESG stood for. Perhaps you've never heard it before, or maybe even you thought it was ESP, as I'm here discussing with Ms. Shannon. But now we know very clearly through our presenters, I hope, through our panelists, that the E stands for environmental, the environmental impact. And as we're here discussing tourism and ESG, the environmental impact that tourism can have and how we can mitigate against that and adapt effectively. And the S we know stands for the social aspect of it. And I think all presenters really did quite well on the social element, beginning with Mr. Biles all the way through to Ms. Shannon. We spoke about gender equality, gender considerations. We spoke about the community. We spoke about ensuring that livelihoods are impacted in the way that we want them to be impacted. Because here, as we discuss, we speak of bottom line, the profit. We look at the products, we look at the processes, but underlying this all, and perhaps most important, would be the people. And I know we've been discussing here the Minister of Tourism, the Honorable Edmund Bartlett, who, as is indicated, is quite a visionary in this area. You have the tourism workers pension scheme. This is also one way showing how we can bring some benefit to the people. The people are the foundation. And of course, not to forget the G, which it seems no pillar is more important than the other. They're all interconnected. They all work closely together. So I segued, as I mentioned, the minister into the G, as was very clearly indicated, the oversight, the governance, some of these elements, the surveillance, setting the boundaries. How are we going to monitor? How are we going to measure? How are we going to report? I think I've learned quite a lot. Did you? And I realized no one responded to my network's question. This is a Tourism Linkages Network forum. How did you know that you weren't going to get a weekend for two? We have Sandals Online, we have Chuckle, but everybody missed that. I'm sorry. The time is now closed because I'm going to give you the answer to the question. Don't spank yourself too much if you thought of the answer, but you didn't say it, and so you missed out on the prize. Next time, I will ensure that I say what the price is before I ask the question, so everybody will answer. So for the 5 networks, we have gastronomy, we have health and wellness, we have sport and entertainment, we have shopping, and I won't say I leave the best for last, but it is the one that is most applicable to what we're doing right now, the knowledge network, which is quite important. And I say this because all presenters spoke about education. In fact, in my notes, I have education in block letters because education is so vital, not only because it links, as Sandals was indicating through Miss Shannon here, about the human capital investment and the human capital development for the training, but education in this space. So we know this is one way of educating all of us. How can we be more responsible as it relates to ESG? Like I recall years ago, I went to a hotel and I was asked to reuse my towel. We go to a hotel, we think you use your towel once and then you put it to the wash. But I was asked to reuse the hotel, and that also had an element of the environmental impact there of not having to wash 1,000,001 towels, which also has implications for the chemicals used to wash, the water used to wash, and all of that. So even these small steps, when you go to a hotel, they might not have the technology where the light immediately comes off when you leave the room, or your air conditioning comes off, and you're asked, please remember to turn off your lights. Because there was a question online, how can we as individuals get involved with ESG? It's right there looking at us. We only need to look around and get involved and really try to follow some of the guidelines. So I'm sharing with you what I learned. And as I said, I have big there, education. Also, what I have is partnerships. And this came through all the presentations, not just the partnership of the public sector with the private sector, but the partnerships with you in the community, you in your agencies. I saw one agency saying yes, the plastic free July movement saying yes. And I'm sure there are other agencies on. We have Dr. Fingal Robinson, Secretary for the Jamaican Women in Coffee. I'm sure there are other persons connected to other organizations. Yes, who are speaking to you. And we're speaking to you as individuals, you at home. When you travel, when you go to the hotels, Ms. Shannon said it. It's not nice to have anymore. It's a need to have. So you realize that you as the people, you have the power, because if you decide that you're not traveling unless you're traveling to a hotel or an attraction that is top mark with environmental and social sustainability and governance practices, then guess what? They will have to change. They will have to transform. You heard it here. So I want you, if you can, please share with me, what did you learn, as I ask each presenter just to give me their final word for this virtual forum. And I'm going to begin in the order in which I began. Mr. Biles, the floor is open to you, your closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I think this is part of it. Pardon me? Are you hearing me? I'm not muted.
No, you're not muted, but we could hear you a little louder, perhaps.
Okay, sorry. No, I just want to thank you for including me in this. I think ESG is is extremely important, and education is going to be a key component of driving it to where it needs to go. And it does make business sense from the perspective of what was outlined earlier. It finds a more efficient operation. It also, tourists want it, so you will get more business through being able to showcase what your ESG programs are. But more importantly, it's just the right thing to do. So that really is where it all comes together.
Thank you, Mr. Biles. Dr. Fingal Robinson.
So, I mean, I want to echo that as well, but I want to say and bring it to something that probably we can all relate to. We've seen in the past couple of weeks that we have broken in the world many heat records. There was 1 week where 3 times for the week we broke the heat record, right? And just to say that, you know, implementing good ESG practices is one way in which we can help to curb this, not to make us break any more records. You know, it's not just good for your business. It's not just good for the community, but it's good for overall sustainability. It's good for us achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Very important, because if we each do our part, we can, you know, make that a reality. And even though they've said that how we are past the stage of 1.5 to stay alive, we can go to, hopefully we can achieve 2, you know. So yeah, that's my last thought on that.
Thank you, Dr. Fingal Robinson. Ms. Shannon.
Well, similarly, I would say thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I am going to shamelessly repeat something that Mr. Biles said earlier. There's no planet B. I love that. I'm going to continue to reuse that because it is so critical. I firmly believe that the issues encompassed by ESG it's probably the defining name and issue of our generation right now. It is so critical that the only way to overcome the challenges is together. And so we talk about the collaboration and the communication. It is more important than ever before. I believe that Jamaica has some of the world's best people and assets, and we have a true opportunity to lead in this space like never before. And so I look forward to the journey ahead and to taking advantage of the opportunities that we have in promoting strong and positive ESG frameworks and initiatives across the community. So thank you again.
Thank you. There you have it. And one key word I'm going to leave with you. ESG just does lead to something rather important, resilience. And if you heard Minister Bartlett speak, you're going to hear about resilience. And Jamaica was quite instrumental in leading at the United Nations a resolution that adopted the Global Tourism Resilience Day. Jamaica did that, as indicated, with little, but with Talawa, right? And now we've come to the close. So bridging the gap. This means finally. I've been doing it. This is going to be my favorite word. This and yes. And we have Mrs. Stephanie McIntyre Gross. Thanks to your interpreter, the Jamaican Sign Language interpreter. Let's see what that was the word for thanks. Is that thanks? Oh, thanks. This is thanks. This is yes. This is thanks. And this is finally. And to our panelists, Mr. John Biles, Managing Partner, Chucky Caribbean and Adventure Tours. Thank you. Dr. Chanel Fingal Robinson, with your tongue twister. You're the Social Development and Sustainability Specialist, SSS. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so very much. And Ms. Jessica Shannon, CXO, Chief Experience Officer, Sandals Resorts International. Thank you so much. Thanks to our technical team. Thanks to the Tourism Linkages Network, the Tourism Enhancement Fund. Follow them on their social media pages. And remember, you can catch this virtual forum again on YouTube in English and Spanish. Have a wonderful day.